Late night bus creep. I am a 19-year-old female. At the time of this story, I lived in the worst part of downtown Portland, right behind the projects. I know I shouldn't have been riding the bus late at night, but there are some circumstances that just can't be helped. One Friday night in April, my boyfriend was hosting his birthday celebration with a big group of friends. I work on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, so I've been a bit annoyed about his choice of timing, but I understood it was the most convenient for everyone else, so it's all he could do. Since I worked early the next morning, this meant I had to ride the bus home late at night. The ride home was about 40 minutes. I'd never really been bothered much on the bus before, and always felt comfortable out at odd hours of the night. That night, however, felt different. Around the time I started heading home, I got this terrible foreboding feeling. I armed myself with my pocket knife and started the journey home well past 11 p.m. The bus ride began entirely normal, but the feeling never subsided. I was very aware of everything happening around me. Soon I decided to text my roommate to see if he would be in the area at the time I was due downtown, as he finished work around then. Soon I got a reply that he had been relieved early from work, but was turning around to wait at my bus stop. I'm still glad I made the decision to text him, as it may have saved my ass. One stop before I was due to get off the bus, this obese guy with green hair and a pit bull gets on the bus. I didn't see him notice me or anything like that, so I went about minding my own business. The stop at which he got on was only about 2 blocks away from mine. I got to my stop and was greeted by my roommate. Here's where it gets creepy. The guy that just got on the bus gets off at the stop also. As my roommate and I start walking home, this guy starts trying to keep pace with us and gets way too close to me. My roommate and I are fast walking on the edge of a wide sidewalk, so it's very obvious this guy is trying to get close to me for some reason. My roommate notices as well, and we fall silent. He's right behind me, and then I feel a hand grab at my backpack. I shriek and we start running. We manage to outpace him and turn a sharp corner. I look back to the guy to give him a what the fuck kind of look, but at that moment I notice he had stopped where we had turned and is now taking pictures of me with his flash on. This is the dead of night on a sidewalk with some crusty office buildings. Nothing worth taking pictures of. It scares me that I never followed my instincts and contacted my roommate. Things may have turned out even worse. Creepy bus guy who took pictures of me. Let's never meet again. Creepy Japanese neighbor. This happened to me during the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, until I moved due to the fear of living alone in my apartment. Slight backstory: I am a 22-year-old British female and have been living in Japan since April 2015. The apartment I first lived in was rented out by a company connected to my school. It was not a good apartment at the time, but at the time I didn't know what the general quality and size versus price of Japanese apartments were, and I got given one of 5 that I chose before I moved. The apartment was seriously tiny, 1 room, kitchen connected, and bed about 2 steps away from it. I could walk the length of my whole apartment in about 10 steps, but I was excited because it was my first time living alone, and in a country I previously only dreamt about living in. About a month after of living and studying in Japan, I met my ex-boyfriend. He told me that the area I lived in was not a good one, and known for inhabiting creepy people, so warned me not to walk alone at night anymore, or if I did, then to not wear headphones and be wary at all times. Anyways, into the story. I've been living there for 6 months. When my best friend returned to England and moved out, he lived on my right. This left me a little scared, cause I had noticed previously that the neighbor on my left side was a bit odd. He would constantly clear his throat, as if he was coughing up a fucking hairball or something like that. He didn't live immediately next to me, but down the hall, so when I exited my room and looked left, his door was in view. On the left were stone stairs going up to nothing. I was on the top floor, and if you went past the stairs, you'd be standing outside his door, and on the left is more hallway and stairs going down. I only took these stairs to do my washing. Otherwise, I always used the stairs on my right at the end of the hall, because the stairs leading to the washing machines were always full of spiders. Fuck that. So my friend moved out, and after that, I noticed this guy a lot more. At this point, I never seen his face, but I know when he was out or in his place in the evenings due to the lights that would shine a yellow color, he still cleared his throat all the time, and despite having space between us, it was loud enough to sound like it was coming from outside my door. That's how loud he did it. To be fair though, our walls were crazy thin. I didn't think much of it until I started noticing that when I went outside my door to smoke, his light would suddenly turn off. I didn't think too deeply about it since I would usually go at night and maybe just decide to go to bed at that moment, and I coincidentally saw it. Every single time. Anyways, one day I went out for a cigarette. Saw his peephole go black. I stared at it while I smoked, trying to pick up any changes in light to confirm or disprove my theory that he hadn't turned the light off and it was in fact blackened out by his own face. I stood up this time for some reason. I usually sat down, but I had a weird feeling this day and stayed standing. I forgot to mention that our doors are metal, so opening and closing them makes a really loud noise. I stubbed up my cigarette and put it in my ashtray. When I noticed him open his door and start coming out, I was on high alert, so I a bit panicked. But I thought, nah, he's probably just taking his trash out or something like that. Then, I went cold, as I noticed he wasn't holding anything at all. He just stood there facing me. I turned slowly and as naturally as possible to go into my apartment. As he started walking past hall to the stairs and towards my apartment, the path was straight, so if he was intending to walking past, he'd have kept his feet straight, but he didn't. His walk was angled towards me, and the space between our doors was less than 3 meters. I opened my door, and he suddenly started to walk much faster. I got round my door and entered, closing it, and just had enough time to see him lurch towards my door. As I slammed it shut and locked it, he stopped outside. I couldn't see him because of my broken people, but I didn't hear him going past my door or going back to his, so I knew he was right there, on the other side. As I was listening intently, I saw my handle very slightly jiggle. He was trying to open my fucking door, with fuck knows what intentions. I waited for maybe 30 seconds before I heard him finally turn and walk back to his place, and the door closed. I was extremely panicked at this point, so I called my male school friend and explained everything. He asked if I wanted him to come over, but he lived pretty far from me, and it was already late, so I told him I'd be okay. And he stayed on the phone with me for a while as I calmed down. During our conversation, he asked me to open my door and close it, to see if the guy would come out again. I did, opening and closing it hard, listening intently, and to no surprise, I heard his fucking door open and close again, after he probably paused and stared, wondering why he'd heard my door but not seen me. After this, I was so scared to be in my apartment at night, or to go out for cigarettes, I started testing it, leave my room silently, smoke, then close my door normally after I was done and listen. Sure enough, every time I closed it, I heard his open. Occasionally heard him come out to my door and just stand there. One night I was out smoking and the creep came home. As I was there, I was frozen still, staring at him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't even open his door at first, just stood fucking staring at it for way longer than normal. Another thing that I can't say 100% was him, but I'm pretty fucking sure. Sometimes I go smoke in the stairwell when it was raining because the rain would hit me when I stood outside my door. I smoke on my cigarette and my ashtray. It was kinda smelly, so I left it there on the stairwell. Third step, same one I habitually sat on when I smoked there. Left it tucked in the corner by the wall and went inside, closing my door normally and went to bed. I knew the people that lived on my right, 1 to 3 doors down. We all used the second stairwell when we went out, and I know for a fact that they don't smoke. On the left of my creepy neighbor's door was a Chinese couple that I didn't know. They and the creep always used the stairs that lead down to the washing machines. The stairs I was sat on, as I said, aren't used because they go up to nothing, and they aren't even visible unless you walk around a corner. Anyways, I go back the next morning to get my ashtray, and not only was it now a couple steps up and then in the middle, there was a cigarette butt and scrunched up packet of cigarettes. Same brand that I smoke. I don't know if it was him, but that stairwell was only easily visible to us. This was all happening over end of months 2015 and beginning of 2016. The thing that convinced me to finally move out was the following. I'd been out for dinner with my boyfriend and we got back after 11. To enter the gate at my apartment after 11 p.m., you need a key as they lock it. I was walking faster than my boyfriend, turned a corner leading to my apartment, and saw a figure stood in the darkness near the gate, waiting and watching me approach. He started to appear from the shadows, away from the apartment and towards me. My boyfriend turned the corner, and as soon as this guy noticed, he pulled his phone out and quite clearly pretended to talk to someone on it. My boyfriend and I walked past, and he slowly followed. I didn't realize at this point that it was my creepy neighbor, but we were silent, both wary of the situation. As I got to the gate, I noticed that it was locked and started searching in my bag for my keys. The guy came up, said excuse me, and nonchalantly opened the gate and stood on the other side. I found my keys by this point and was holding them ready to lock the gate again, but the guy was just standing as if he was waiting to see if my boyfriend would enter with me or not. I showed him my keys, said thank you, and that I locked the gate. He reluctantly left before my boyfriend had come in, and we watched him go up to the stairs, but didn't see which apartment he went to. When I saw he'd used the washing machine stairs, it clicked that it was my creepy neighbor, and I told my boyfriend. We went up the same stairs slowly. I went first and peered around the corner to where my neighbor lived. He was standing there waiting, staring at his door but not opening it. He noticed me come around and turned to me, staring until he saw my boyfriend and then went inside. Abruptly. This was the last incident I could handle. I knew he was up to something no good, and I didn't want to wait around for anything else to happen. So I decided, after that, to cancel my contract and moved out. Had to pay a fair amount to do it, too. Until the day I moved, he still did creepy things. I'd hear him outside my door or see the black people and know he was staring at me. So, creepy over excessively throat-clearing guy. Let's not ever meet again. The man with the tinted windows. This happened to me last springtime, around April. I used to like taking night walks. I very much enjoy the quiet sleepiness of my hometown and the cooler air at night. It was around 9:30 to 10 p.m., and I headed out of my apartment for my usual stroll around town. In the past, I had a few odd occurrences here and there, from drunk men following me to shouting at me to coyotes and such popping out of the woods. But nothing I perceived as much of a threat, you know? For context, I'm 23, I was 21 at the time, 6'1" and a pretty thin guy. I'd always been someone who's aware of their surroundings, and due to some prior trauma, that trait basically has amplified 10 times. I was walking down a quiet road, right next to our town's middle school, when I see a car in the distance, driving towards me. I didn't think too much of it at first, as the roads doesn't get much traffic, especially at nighttime. I just cracked it up to a car passing through. I noticed though they were going extremely slow, basically just coasting. As they got closer to me, they turned their headlights off. Now at this point, I'm silently stringing swears together in my head, starting to panic, but trying to keep composed and look calm. They slowly drive right past me, and I breathe a sigh of relief internally. Seconds later though, to my dismay, they do a quick U-turn and start coming back up the road slowly towards me. I pull my phone out of my pocket, unlock it, and visibly hold it up in the air, hoping that they get the message I'm aware, and maybe make them think I'm ready to call someone. That doesn't seem to faze them, as they continue creeping up the road, eventually coasting slowly right next to me. I heard the passenger door start to open and I jumped over a small wooden fence into the school's parking lot. I'm not sure why I didn't immediately break into full-on sprint. The driver must not have liked that, as they quickly backed up and sped into the school parking lot, where I currently was. Again, they started slowly coasting next to me and beginning to open their driver's side door. At this point, it finally clicked in me to run. I ran up this little hill and jumped over a few more fences. I looked back after a while and saw the car in the distance back up and speed down the road I was originally walking on. I stayed, crouched next to this utility shed for a few minutes, hoping the guy had finally given up and left, before making my way quickly back up the road to get to a more public area. There was no sign of him. At this point, I was sobbing, shaking, and called my mother to tell her what had transpired. In the middle of her trying to calm me down, I heard the rev of an engine behind me. I turned around to see the car. This time, they had their brights on, idling behind me. I told my mother they were back, and I was too scared to move and didn't know what to do. They started once again to slowly drive up to me, and finally at this point, my instincts kicked into overdrive and I bolted into the woods across the street. I ran through the woods for a bit, terrified that the car was going to be on the other side of them. Once I got out, my mom was still on the phone with me, telling me to get home as fast as I could. I reluctantly exited the woods, looking for any signs of the car, but I didn't see it. I again burst into Olympic-like run, crying the whole way back home. Looking back on the situation now, I probably should have ran to a police station or public area instead of home, in case the guy was following me, and found out where I lived. So, to the guy in the car with those tinted windows, let's not meet again. Highway Follower. This story takes place in April. I was a senior in high school. I lived my whole life in the Midwest, so I was always eager for spring break when I would vacation to somewhere more interesting. This year I was going to Oregon with my friend Mary. Mary was 3 years older than me and dating my best friend Josh, who was attending the University of Oregon. She happened to be moving there the week of my spring break, so it was perfect for me to ride along. We set off on our journey on Friday nights at 10:30 p.m. I know, weird time to leave, but it was nice to get through Chicago in the middle of the night to escape traffic. We spent most of Saturday driving through flat, boring farmland. We got to see the Badlands National Park, which was pretty cool, especially after such a boring day. At around 11 that night, we were both exhausted, so we called and booked a hotel in Montana about 3 hours away. We were starting to enter the section of this part of the country that was pretty much just a ton of Native American reserves, when we turned down a long beat-up road. Only one other car was on this road, and it was a large white truck that had been behind us for a while. We drove on this road for a few miles before this car started riding our ass. We slowed down and let him pass, and he floored it. Again, us being exhausted, we saw this as an opportunity to get to our hotel faster. We figured it was a local that we knew, and he could speed without any trouble, so we sped down the road just a few miles per hour less than him to make our trip shorter. We came to a stop and he turned left, which we also happened to be doing. He pulled into a parking lot for a bar that was just on the corner as we continued, but he didn't park. He just waited. And as we passed, he pulled up behind us. Now, I am a very paranoid person, so at that moment I told Mary that I thought he was following us, but she of course reassured me he probably just didn't want us behind him, because some people are just like that. I agreed and we kept on. I was still nervous, but watched him turn off the road, and my mind was at ease. Fast forward about half an hour, and Mary is starting to show obvious signs of exhaustion in her demeanor, so I offered to drive the rest of the way. She said, okay, and that she'd pulled off at the next chance. Problem was, the road we were on didn't connect with any other roads. There were no driveways or stores, or really anything except for wide open plains for miles. She decided to pull off the road to make the switch, but as she started to pull over, a bright set of headlights came up out of nowhere and looked like they were in the back of her car. The guy ran us off the road, and we almost crashed. We came to a stop and both looked at each other like, what the fuck was that? But before we could say anything, the car from behind pulled off like 15 yards ahead of us, and it was the white truck from before. My heart sank, and I said, Mary, don't get out of the car, just keep driving, do not stop. She was obviously weirded out at this point, but wasn't totally convinced that it was all that dangerous, but she saw I was scared and started to creep back on the road. The guy ahead must have seen us moving as he started to drive too. We stopped again and he drove slowly, about a quarter mile up the road, turned off into a patch of trees and killed his headlights. I told her that I was sure he was following us at this point. We had been driving forever, and what were the odds we encountered each other again? She called Josh so we could get a third opinion. He was never the type to assume the worst, and he wasn't even there, so he told us that it was probably just a coincidence and that we should keep driving and be wary though. So we continued on for another 20 minutes without seeing him again. But when we passed through another small town, I spotted him. He was sitting at a stop sign, on a side road facing the road we were on with its lights. We passed him. He turned his lights on and started driving again, right on our tail. At this point, Mary was convinced and she immediately called 911. We were in the middle of fucking nowhere though, and her phone kept dropping the call. The dispatcher said they couldn't get a read on our location and asked where we were, but not even the map on my phone would load. We felt like we were dead already. He passed us again and I shouted for Mary to speed up so I could write down his plate number down. We got it right before he sped off out of sight. The dispatcher was able to find us and told us to head to the nearest police station about 15 to 20 minutes away. She also told us not to stop driving, and that this guy was a professional at what he was doing. She informed us that his tactic of passing us was as he could know where we were turning and going, so he could be always one step ahead of us. Fear sank in both of us when we realized that he knew exactly where we were, even when we didn't know where he was. we drove on, with him popping up behind us once more and again speeding off. I got the police station, pulled up on my phone, and we were almost there. We stopped at the light where we were supposed to turn right, but we hadn't seen the guy in a while, and this looked like the perfect road to sneak around on. I didn't tell Mary to turn, she kept driving. She asked me where it was, and I felt guilty for not telling her, so I told her we passed it and that my phone hadn't loaded directions until just then. She made a U-turn and we headed back. On our way there, we passed the guy. He was heading the way we were going before turning around, and we don't think he saw us that time. We made it to the police station, where they were expecting us and sent cars out to find him. We got a police escort to our hotel an hour away, and the rest of our trip was as normal as can be. We calculated that he followed us for somewhere around 60 to 70 miles. We don't know if he was caught, nor do we know what his intentions were, but I still get chills whenever I tell this story, and whenever I see a similar white truck. Remember this story while taking long road trips. And don't forget to always check what's behind you. Five dogs. This happened earlier this year, around April. I can't remember the exact date, as this coincided with another incident of mine. Now, the apartment building I lived in is 4 stories of terror. It was built in a time of long ago and used to be a fantastic hotel in its day. Unfortunately, poor maintenance over the years left it a crumbling mess. I did love this place, and I know every nook and cranny, every entrance and exit, how many steps between each floor. It also has 2 outbuildings, both of which are 2 stories each and abandoned, though the farthest one wasn't that way for the majority of the time I lived there. I lived in a small corner apartment, set back into a corner. There was almost a sad caricature of a hallway extending past the large open space of my floor, and the apartment directly next door were my parents. The doors featured an auto-lock knob, which, as you probably know, lock automatically when shut, and you need a key to get in. My parents spend the majority of their time in my apartment. We watch TV, eat dinner, play games, and the like. Now, despite having so many apartments in the building, there are very few other tenants, most of them great people, who had come by and eat dinner with us. These reasons, added with the fact that I always lock myself out, were why I had my dad change the doorknob to a standard instead of the auto-locking. I never locked my door when I was out, as I trusted the other tenants not to steal from me. I didn't lock my door when I was home because of the high flow of people in and out of my place. I didn't lock my door at night either, which is probably the stupidest thing I could ever have done. However, I never felt unsafe because, as stated, I trusted my neighbors, and also that I had 5 dogs in my apartment every single night. My parents would keep their 3 dogs in my apartment overnight because they knew I didn't lock my door, and they figured that even if it was unlikely, I could use the added protection in case of an intruder. Keep in mind that they're no little dogs. My dad's German Shepherd mix alone weighed 105 pounds. We still had Christmas decorations up because everyone was too lazy to take them down. We had a new tenant move in on my floor, and he always seemed to be gone, so none of us really knew him. About a week after he moved in, things started going missing from everywhere. The most noticeable thing being the Christmas decorations, with a string of tinsel hanging out from under his apartment door. My dad confronted him about it when his air compressor came up missing, in which the new tenant, Lee, shamefully brought the compressor along with everything else he stole back out of his apartment with one problem. Lee had scrawled his name across every single item. Now, my dad is a friendly guy for the most part, but he does have anger issues, and finding mine and my mom's clothes that had been swiped from the laundry room in Lee's possession made him completely freak out. Lee had all but vanished after that, and nothing was out of place for the next week or so. It was about 4:30 in the morning when I was woken up by the dogs slamming themselves into the door and barking in a way I never heard them bark before, which scared the shit out of me. I was expecting them to start foaming at the mouth. I went and stood a few feet behind the dogs, trying to see what they were acting so aggressive about. The door repeatedly opened a few inches before getting shut by the barrier of dogs against it. I threw the deadbolt as fast as I could. I went for their phone near the door, and because it was connected to the phone in my parents' apartment, I pressed the pager button to make theirs ring. It is still the fastest response time I've ever gotten from my dad because I barely got the words, "someone is trying to get in," out of my mouth before I heard my dad yelling like a knight going into battle. My dad chased off not one but two men, none other than Lee and a friend of his. I opened the door for my dad, who checked to make sure that I was okay and gave me a lecture that I needed to lock the door from then on. My mom came in and gave me the same lecture. She told me that they were woken up by the sound of the dogs, and that they had never heard the dogs sound like that either. She said that my dad was already getting out of bed, but once the phone started ringing, my dad had developed the speed of the flash and was out the door before she could even answer. The owner of the apartments kicked Lee out immediately, and no one had seen him since. I'm so grateful that I had 5 dogs with me, or who knows what might have happened. Dad, thanks for learning to be terrifying in prison. And Lee, let's not meet again. Close to closing scare. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and this takes place nearly 6 years ago. As a little backstory, my family at the time owned a little shopping strip, which had a car, as well as a large building that housed a restaurant, a gas station, and a laundromat. While we owned the building, we only ran the gas station, which was the middle business of the building, with the pumps several feet in front of the store. I'd say it was around mid-April that I was closing this night by myself, something I'd done numerous times before and was comfortable with. Before this, I'd never been creeped out by anything. We'd never been robbed before even. That was just how safe we were, and how a good location we were in. It was getting close to closing around 9:35, and I was getting ready to count down the money in the cash register, so that I had enough to have a little change and put what I needed in the money bag for the next day after I closed. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was that the strip had 3 entrances and exits, one by the car wash, one in front of the restaurant, and one in front of the laundromat. The gas pumps were right there in the middle between the one in front of the restaurant and the one in front of the laundromat. Just as I was getting money out to start counting, as I had no customers, I saw a headlight coming from the store window and looked up. I saw a car pull in through the laundry entrance, drive past the pumps and goes to the exit in front of the restaurant and just stops. It wasn't uncommon for cars or trucks to come in one entrance and the parking lot as a turnaround and exited anything one and going back the way they came. However, this alone didn't creep me out, as there was still traffic, and I figured whoever it was just waiting to get back on the streets. What creeped me out was the white pickup that came in behind the car. He was as close to the building as he could, and went from the laundromat to my store to the restaurant. As he was passing, our eyes locked, and it was clear he was trying to see how many people were inside. After he passed the restaurant, he turned around and got as close as he could again, then going from the restaurant to my store to the laundromat. Again, he passed our eyes, locked. Something about the look in his eyes creeped me out. He then leaves out the same entrance he came. That was creepy enough, but then I noticed that the car had come in before him was still sitting there at the restaurant entrance. There was no other traffic on the street at the moment, so they should have left by now. Now it could have been nothing, but I couldn't help but feel the people in that car and truck, the two, were working together. For the first time in the 5 years I've been closing by myself, I was scared to close by myself. The laundromat was already closed, and the restaurant was getting ready to close down themselves, and I didn't need to bother them with asking them to send someone to stay with me the rest of the time. My older sister lived in an apartment with her husband, not 3 minutes away, so I called her and told her to see if her husband could spend the last 15 minutes or so with me after telling her what had happened. Now, my sister can tend to be a royal bitch when she wants to be, and she tried to refuse to send him. That is until I threatened to call our parents and let them know what was going on, and that she refused to send her husband up there. Then she could explain her reason to them for not sending him. That changed her attitude really quickly, and she said he'd be right there. The red car took off as I was hanging out with her. I don't know if they saw me on the phone or what, but I was just glad they were gone. He was there 3 minutes later with her in tow, which made me furious as she was 7 months pregnant at the time with her first child. Luckily nothing happened and I got closed down quickly, and we left. I just don't know what might have happened if I hadn't made the call. creep obsessed with graveyards. First time posting any creepy encounter of mine online. This specific encounter takes place between August 2014 to May 2015. So unfortunately, I was never really close to my grandfather at all. Mostly because when I was a baby, my parents immigrated to the UK. Since I was so young then, I hadn't really ever spoken to him. We talked over the phone rarely, and when we did, it was always comforting to know he was alive, since he spent the last years of his life feeling poorly. I believe he died in 2010 in April, exactly a month shy of his birthday. At this time, I was still living in the UK. My mom was on the phone with her brother that night. It was quite sad, and I remember it like it was yesterday. My family, especially my mother, was very upset and perturbed. She flew back to her home country for the funeral and stayed there a few days. She stayed longer due to the eruption of a volcano in Iceland in the same year that stopped practically all air traffic. So fast forward to the summer of 2014. At this point, my family had already permanently moved back to our home country. My uncle, one day, decided he wanted to put something on my granddad's grave. Something other than flowers, since they didn't last long. He went out and bought this white angel and some paints for us to use. Since I am quite artistic and into that sort of stuff, I agreed to help him. We spent at least 2 days on it, one to paint it, the other to let it dry completely. Both of us tried really hard to make it look good, especially me, since I felt like it would be a way to show that I respected him, despite our very non-acquainted relationship. Once we were satisfied with the results, we went to the graveyard and placed the angel next to his tombstone, since a bit of the lettering on the actual tombstone was fading. I also brought along a black paint to fill the words in while we were there. About a week later, it's Sunday, and my uncle goes to church practically every single week. That day, after church had finished, he decided he wanted to visit the grave to check on our angel. When he arrived, he found it was completely missing. He went around the small graveyard to see if somebody had possibly moved it, but it was nowhere to be seen. When my uncle informed me, I was super angry and sad. I couldn't understand how somebody could be so cruel, stealing something off someone else's grave. It was so disrespectful. I genuinely felt bummed out that we put in so much work and effort for somebody else to just grab it and go home. The following week, every time I would leave the house, I'd try and take a peek into other people's gardens to check if it was there. Failed. Never found it. We tried to look on the bright side and assumed that whoever stole it took it because it looked good, since many other graves also had little statues of angels and ornate candles. Unfortunately, stealing is still a problem in my rather quiet and small neighborhood to this day. Houses are still being robbed, and just last year, somebody had the cheek to steal a gold necklace that was around the neck of Mary Magdalene in our church. Anyways, after 2 weeks, we realized it was definitely not going to show up. I had my own suspicions. There was this old lady in my neighborhood notorious for being quite the kleptomaniac, and I instantly thought of her. Obviously, I never proved it. Sometime in April 2015, my family were at my grandma's house eating dinner when the doorbell rang. My uncle, as per usual, went to answer it and found that nobody was outside. He got a little angered, thinking that the kids next door were playing stupid pranks on us. The doorbell didn't ring again after. When I later left, it was as I was exiting the house that I realized the angel was outside. It was a little hidden, just to the left of the door, so my uncle probably couldn't see it when he opened it. It was in the exact same condition we left it in, meaning it was probably left indoors. We never found out who put it back. But what was creepy about the situation was that our angel was delivered on the exact date my grandfather died. We were all very shocked, since we believed somebody was playing a really mean trick on us. We didn't take the angel back to the graveyard, fearing it'd be nicked again, but my uncle did tell our priest about it. The priest told my uncle that apparently they had found weird pouches filled with what seemed like herbs and incense scattered around the graveyard. I've heard a few rumors that these were old ladies practicing witchcraft in my town, but nobody knew who was doing such a thing. Portuguese people are quite superstitious, may I mention. When the priest was informed that the angel was once on my grandfather's grave was oddly returned on the anniversary of his death, he suggested not to keep it in sight, fearing that those witches had something to do with his mysterious disappearance in the first place. My uncle agreed, and the angel is currently sitting in my grandma's shed, right at the back. It may seem a bit weird, but for some reason, I have always found graveyards intriguing, and when my family would go visit my grandfather, I'd wander off and see practically every tombstone in the place, and really just wanted to read people's names, the date they died, etc. I also visited my paternal grandparents' graves. One day in May of the same year when my mom, my dad, and I We're at a cafe pretty close to the cemetery. A person they knew arrived, and they started chatting, and I found myself bored. My mom realized that it was about 5:10 p.m., so my mom instructed me to place the flowers she had bought on my grandfather's grave, since she and my dad were talking to this guy. The graveyard opens every day at 8 a.m. and closes at 5:30 p.m., and it is literally 1 minute away from the cafe. So, at that moment, I crossed the road with the flowers in hand when suddenly, at the entrance, I was able to see that somebody was hunched down close to my grandfather's grave. Now, from afar, I could tell it was an old woman whom I did not recognize, and she seemed to be very enthralled by the sight. So much so, I noticed she grabbed one of the wax candles sitting nearby. She didn't notice me at first since she was quite far away, but she soon spotted me, and by the look on her face, she was very frightened. She looked as if she recognized me. Now, since I had no idea who she could be, and since I also felt a little unsettled by her presence, I ran back to the cafe and told my mom about the woman. At that moment, she was still busy chatting with a friend of hers, and she did not go straight away. There were 5 minutes left before the cemetery closed, when my mom finally decided to come with me to see this supposed unknown woman. Almost coincidentally, the lady was gone. We ventured to the grave and found that the candle I aforementioned was missing. Coincidence? After describing to my mom, she was sure she had never seen that woman before, and she was most likely to blame for the angel's disappearance, too. To this day, we still have no idea who this woman is, but I've always thought of the possibility that maybe my grandfather had a lover, and since she felt upset or angry that he was married to my grandmother, stealing things off of his grave made her feel better or allowed herself to get her revenge. I don't know, but the look on her face still creeps me out to this day. I'm certain she knew who I was. Family full of hobo magnets. I posted on Let's Not Meet recently about my hobo hell, and my sister reminded me of her and our cousins' two experiences that happened within months of each other in the year 2009. A little backstory. We lived in Virginia at the time, and I was 20 years old. My sister was 13, and our cousin was 7 years old. There was this restaurant called Richie Freeze, and it had the best all-American food around. This place was located on a busy main road in the not-so-greatest neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst location either. The first time this happened was at the end of April in 2009, when we went to Richie Freeze for my birthday. It was the three of us and my parents, and there was a pretty long line that day. We were waiting outside the door for about 15 minutes, and my cousin and I decided we were gonna take a walk around the building, because we are the most impatient people on earth. We took our sweet little time walking around. When we got back to the back of the building, we stopped to play with some rocks for about 5 minutes or so. At that moment, I told my cousin we should head back and that she needs to hold my hand, because I didn't want her to get hit by a car. She was kind of walking behind me, so when I felt her letting go of my hand and I assumed she was looking around, I turned around to tell her to pick up the pace, and that's when I realized a hobo was just standing there holding her hand looking at me. I screamed at him to let go, and I proceeded to kick him in the shin. He mumbled something and let go of her hand and walked away like nothing happened. I was so freaked out, so I picked her up and hauled ass to where my parents were. We didn't want to tell them what happened because my dad would have killed this man. After everything was said and done, I asked my cousin why she didn't scream, and she said that she was so scared that she couldn't move or speak. Needless to say, she really didn't go out with us in public for a good year or so. The next incident happened in around the middle of August, and this time it was just my parents, my sister, and me. Before we even got to Richie Freeze, my sister was being quite the little wench. She was throwing a fit for whatever reason, and decided that when we got there, she was going to sit in the car and not have dinner. My mom and dad were fed up with her attitude, and told her that if that's what she wanted to do, then us three will just go in and eat. We got there, and the three of us went in and got our table and ordered our food. We were just there for about 15 minutes when my sister comes running in like a bat out of hell, sits down and just starts crying. Honestly, we thought she was doing this for attention, but nevertheless, we ask her what is wrong and simply blurts out, "I was almost kidnapped by a smelly hobo." My mom gets into hysterics, and my dad is about to blow a gasket, because mind you, I had a very traumatic experience with a hobo at her age. After she got herself together, she told us that after we went in, she put her headphones in and wasn't really paying attention to what was going on around her. She happened to look up, and there was a hobo coming in on the other side of the back street, where she was and started grabbing her and pulling her out of the car. At this point, she said she went into fight mode and kicked him with all her might and pushed him out of the car. He fell and she ran inside as fast as she could, and that's when she found us. Now, needless to say, we haven't had a hobo experience in years, but we are always looking in every direction, at all times. Creep in the Crocs. Hey guys and gal, just today my cousin Amelia and I were talking about an incident that happened to us a few years ago, so I thought I would post it in as my debut here, you know? Backstory, Amelia and I are very close and 2 years apart. I'm the older of the two, and I've always had a very strong personality. She's a little more meek and passive, so our friendship has been a beautiful thing, because she is like a sister to me rather than a cousin. I've always been very protective of her, and I'm a very vigilant person by nature. Now, in April of 2013, our favorite band, Paramore, was having a show in Houston, Texas, not where we live. We decided to book a hotel room for the night and road trip it over to Texas for the show. We left right after our college classes let out. I was 24 at the time, she was 22, and hit the road. We booked a room at the Holiday Inn, I believe it was, which sat directly behind the Toyota Center, where we thought the concert was. We made great time, get there, get dressed, and leave early enough to grab a drink before the show. As we crossed the street to the center, we realized there's no one around. It's a total ghost town. In fact, the only person we see is a police officer, sitting in his car on the corner of the street, working on his computer. It's then that we realized this is not the right venue for the show. The actual venue was a much smaller center, about a mile away, so we figured, what the heck, we'll walk it out, burn off those alcohol calories, right? We make it to the show with no problem and have an amazing time. We also have a few amazing drinks. What we did not have when we left, however, was good decision-making skills. Not being from the city, we didn't realize the extent of the homeless people in that particular area. Since our hotel wasn't too far away, we thought we would be fine walking back instead of getting a taxi, never once considering maybe that it could be a bad idea. Middle of the night, pitch blackout, unfamiliar city, homeless people around every corner, it's probably fine. And it was fine at first. I would like to pause for just a moment to say, let the record show I have absolutely zero sense of direction. I live my life using my GPS on my phone. As long as my blue dot says on blue line all is right in the world, and I will be okay, you know? The only person worse with directions than me is Amelia. She was totally dependent on my ability to follow my GPS. Anyways, you're about halfway to the hotel when I turned to look behind me, only to discover a man walking that had not previously been there. At this point, he was maybe about 100 feet behind us, and I chalked it up to just another concert goer walking home like us. We kept walking, and just to be sure, I was only being paranoid at this point. I told Mia to turn right at the next corner, so did he. We began turning at every corner while trying to stay on the path to the hotel, and every time we turned, he was never far behind. The next time we turned was when I realized he was gaining on us. I looked at Mia and said, "Don't turn around and don't freak out, but we're being followed. We need to pick up the pace. If at any point I tell you to run, you run, and you do not stop no matter what until you get to the hotel. And if anything happens, remember that your elbow is your strongest point on your body. Use it!" She looked straight ahead, very solemn, and nodded, and we stepped up to speed. We had no more than taken 5 steps when all of a sudden, we heard the sound of running behind us. We turn and look, and here comes this man, barreling down the sidewalk, closing in on us, screaming his lungs out, "You little bitches better stop!" Nope. Mia and I take running as fast as we can, down the dark streets. I know that we won't make it to the hotel before he catches up to us. The hotel is about 2 blocks ahead of us, and 3 blocks to our right. When we hit an intersection and make a last-ditch effort to lose him, we make a sharp right, and start skirting around the Toyota Center when we see that in the distance, the most beautiful form of sanctuary, a cop car from earlier. Adrenaline takes over, and we book it to the car screaming for help, and practically pulling the officer out of his vehicle. "What are you doing? What's going on?" he demanded. "We're being followed. Please help us." Being followed by who? Him! We turn and point, and right at that moment, we see the man fly around the corner and come to a shuddering stop. As soon as he sees who we are with, he whips around and runs back around the corner out of sight. What I remember most clearly is that he has bright orange cargo shorts on and Crocs. The officer called in the description of the guy and asked us where we were heading before offering to drop us off safely at the hotel. We agreed, and Amelia got to experience her first ride in the back of a cop car. She was so concerned over the lack of door handles in the back seat. We made it safely back to our hotel, but I truly don't know what would have happened had that cop not been right there and intervened. We just never heard anything else about the man, but that's alright by me. So, creep in the Crocs? No, just no. You're young, I'm sure you can outrun him. Some background information. I attended a private high school, but our tuition did not cover school trips and the like. This incident took place during the summer of my junior year, during the last few months of school. During high school, I was part of the Language National Honor Society, a club that only lets you in if you have an A and are over level 3 in a non-English language. Mine was Japanese. I had taken several classes over the summer and tested from level 2 to level 4. I was ecstatic to join the club and do all the activities advertised, including traveling to our respective countries of study. That meant, if I kept up my grades, I would be able to travel to Japan over the summer for a homestay. Part of the way us students raised money for our trips was to recycle all the school's recycling and turn it for a collective fund. Again, private high school, I guess we just did things differently. Anyways, the jobs for recycling were divided between students who sorted the recycling and dug through the trash at school, and the ones who drove the bags of bottles to the local recycling center. I was in the latter group, since my family owned a Suburban, which could fit most of the bags in one trip, with all the other seats down. So, during the late April, early July, I was signed up to take the bags. My mom offered to drive, since she wanted to use the truck to go shopping later in the day. It was surprisingly hot for the west side of Oregon. I was dressed in jean shorts, and a t-shirt and sneakers. No way was I going to wear flip-flops at the center, even with the heat. Old soda feels disgusting as it dries between your toes, trust me. At this time, my mom and I were not in a good spot in our relationship. We butted heads over every little thing, including recycling. She just couldn't understand why I hadn't insisted on going to the recycling center earlier in the week. It was wasting time, because she needed to buy something for one of my siblings' school projects. If you want, you can just drop me off. I'll grab a soda or something and text you when I'm done or walk home, I said, annoyed. She sighed. I'll wait around for a bit. We reached the center, which is connected to the QFC. She parked one row from the entrance and I hopped out, dragging 3 huge bags with me. I returned to the car to grab the second batch when I felt it, that tingle going up your spine when someone is watching you. I frowned and looked around. There was no one around, really, except an elderly-looking man sitting in his car in the row behind us. He was looking right at me, and I did a quick check to make sure that there was no soda streaked on my bare leg. Shit, there's a hole in my shorts. Jerk! Go ahead and have a laugh at my dumb teenager self with the bright pink panties. He wasn't laughing, but I was more embarrassed by the staring than creeped out. With a huff and a grumble, I dragged the remaining bags to the recycling center. It's a small open room that you can see into from the parking lot. Recycling machines line the walls and I got to work. A few minutes passed, I got a text from my mom. I'm going ahead to the mall. Text me when you're on your way home. I don't want you waiting around for me to pick you up. Great. I texted back. Okay. A few more minutes, and I hear a car pull up into the parking spot right in front of the recycling center opening. I look up as a reflex and feel my heart sink. It's the old man from before. The tingling down my spine is made of ice this time, settling into my gut. This was not okay. The man was watching me, even if he was waiting for someone. Why not remain in his original spot? Why pull up to the front and park instead of driving closer to the grocery store entrance? Still, I try to ignore it. That is until I hear the creak of door hinges. My head snaps up and I see the man has opened his door and has one leg sticking out. I text my mom. Can you come back? Why? There's a guy watching me. It's creeping me out. Just go tell one of the employees if he's really bothering you. You're young. I'm sure you can outrun them anyways. Thanks, Mom. The man hasn't gone out of his car yet. He's just sitting there watching me, stand there with my iPhone in hand. That's when I notice the very rhythmic movement of one of his arms. Oh, hell no. Abandoning my bottles, I walk out of the recycling center and head towards the entrance of QFC. As I pass the car, I can't help but look, just to make sure I'm right. And lo and behold, the old man is sitting there half out of his car watching me. He's exposed and pleasuring himself. The sight makes my lip curl in disgust. I hurry into QFC and tell the first employee that I see what's going on. She just says that's gross and walks away. Fuck you too, lady! I feel gross, violated almost. It makes my skin crawl, but I'm too nervous to go back out of the store again. I linger by the doors like a creep myself, nervous. After 5 minutes, another employee, a man this time, comes up to me and asks if I'm lost, and reminds me that there is no loitering in the store. I have no choice but to go back out again. Thankfully, the man is gone. I finish the recycling, turn into the receipt for cash, buy that damn soda, and walk home. I never saw that man again, and opted for throwing the bottles at school instead of taking them to the recycling center. Now, on the plus side, my relationship with my mother has gotten a lot better since then. On the down, it wasn't the last or even the most extreme creepy encounter I have experienced